I can give a little bit of a perspective from when I started my career almost 25 years ago, actually a little bit more than that, how different the law was then. Now the law is actually very fair and gender neutral, but still society has to catch up to that. And there's always, a pendulum that swings. It goes this way and that way, and the reaction to the new laws. And, there's many studies that show that women that gain ground, for example, in African villages, when you have women that step up to be community leaders publicly, they face more domestic violence at home because the power dynamic shifts. So a lot of the story really is about domestic violence and how our laws are dealing with it across in our country and across the world. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. That makes a lot of sense. You gave me some interesting kind of factoids when we last spoke about, when women were able to finally, have at least, I think, credit cards, was it? Driving licenses, credit cards.
That's correct.
Can you recap on that? Because I find that crazy. I didn't know that. In the United States.
In the United States, until the mid-1980s, women were not permitted to have their own credit cards or bank accounts without a male cosigner. And it really was a law that was very unfair to women because it was really reflective of the fact that the men controlled property. They controlled bank accounts and credit, and women were very much dependent. In the 1980s, the law changed radically in New York, where it became finally the law that women could have their own financial independence, could establish their own credit, and for the first time started to do that. And the divorce rate actually spiked in the 1980s and 1970s as a result of these new laws, which finally gave women some economic freedom. And also changed the laws of divorce so that if assets were not in the wife's name, she still had a chance to claim them. So the house or the bank accounts or the pensions, for the first time, we had a law that said a housewife at home could still have these rights.
Can you imagine living your life where you're with someone who you're financially dependent on, but it's not because you necessarily aren't trying hard. It's because the system's against you. And then once that system shifts,
exactly right.
You literally just, leave.
I mean, it's systemic. It's systemic. It's the same way we talk about systemic racism. There's still in this country and all over the world, women are at a disadvantage. And it's really something that people need to recognize that, when in the United States, we don't really have even a female president. We finally got a woman vice president, and it's considered such a radical idea. In many ways, the UK is ahead of us in that regard. We don't really think of leadership as a woman, and most corporations don't reflect that. Right now, I think for the first time in our legislature and Congress, we have, I think, between a quarter and 1/3 are women. I mean, this is the first time that we actually have real representation. It makes such a big difference, and it will change the dynamics at a very micro level for women and girls, the way they regard their own identity, and also what's going on in their home life, the way they regard themselves as leaders and earners in their families. So all of these things are related.
On that topic, I remember doing, Women's Empowerment Week last week. It was here. So we have like a theme for each week. And last week was International Women's Day on Monday. So we did a Empowering Women's Week. And some of the information that I found out about, the gender biases and things, towards women was quite shocking indeed.
Yeah.
I didn't know that in some countries, actually, I'm not sure if it's globally, it might be globally, but apparently 1/4 of women don't get an adequate level of education because they're married off at a young age.
Right. That's exactly right.
Think about it. So there's
that's exactly right. Education is a game changer because when women are educated, obviously it makes them aware of what's going on outside their own small community. And it gives them economic opportunities to advance and get degrees where there are more lucrative careers. Until very recently in the United States, women were really confined to teaching and nursing. And those are not necessarily high paying or high status careers, although in the case of nursing, it's changing. But it's very important that women have that.
Yes. Do you feel like the United States at least the people in the United States, if they were able to somehow travel more or be more aware of, foreign cultures, they would make more of a stand for themselves? Do you think that that would have an impact? Because as far as I experienced, it is quite common to find, maybe a lot of people in the United States haven't had the chance to travel,
Yeah.
haven't gone outside of the frontier, because it's such a big country, right?
It's a very big country. Yeah. I mean, there are many Americans that are very proud of the fact that they haven't traveled. There is a sense, it is a big country. There's a lot to visit and see in the United States. The history that's taught in schools is not necessarily the right lessons in many cases. I was born to immigrant parents who always traveled. So I visited Europe many times as a teenager. I've always had a very wide lens to look at the world. It has for sure shaped my own parenting. And my views of almost any topic you could name. I have a very different lens. I've traveled to the Middle East many times, and I've raised my children with the same approach that, travel is a form of education. Meeting people from other cultures, respecting other religions is essential. Unfortunately, that's not the way everyone regards it. And I'm sure in the UK, there are people that haven't necessarily have a big wide view of the world either. I think with the UK, because of the trains and the Eurozone, it's just different. You do see other cultures. You hear people that speak other languages. It makes you maybe a little bit more tolerant. It's different in the US. New York, though, where I am, is very much a multicultural place. My own hometown is very multicultural. So that's why I'm here. That's why I'm in New York.
I see. Where are you from originally?
So my parents are from Iran. My husband is also Iranian. I was born in the US.
Oh, okay.
So my parents were refugees from a Muslim majority country. I'm Jewish. My parents are Jewish. So they left Iran because of discrimination and just increasingly lack of opportunities for minorities. They came to the US, thankfully. And then the Iranian Revolution happened when I was about 10 years old. And I went through that as an American schoolgirl, and I was targeted, actually. I was very viciously bullied because, people don't understand. If you're from the Middle East, if you look a little different, I had a funny last name. It affected my childhood in a very significant way, too. And Iran is still, in the grips of a theocracy. And I hope that changes in my lifetime. I'm hopeful.
Yeah, if you look at there's a lot of, I think, complaining today about the quality of life in developed countries like the United States. But then if you really kind of think about how far we've come, which is why I believe we really need to rethink and be very careful about how we take the next few years, because there's a lot of change. There's a lot of talk about change. There's a lot of talk about breaking down institutions and rebuilding them. But I think we need to be really careful because we've come so far compared to what we had before that if we were to
That's correct.
It could have a negative.
You have to be careful. Change is it has to be gradual. It has to be done in a way where it builds consensus and people can engage and buy into the change. I mean, I think of things like, what's going on in the U.S. military. In the 1980s and 90s, women were not allowed to serve and join the ranks and become leaders the way they have been today. But there's a culture in the military that's more masculine, and it's threatening for people. Even when you look at gay rights in the military in the U.S., it is something that has to be gradual. There needs to be consensus, and then there will be real lasting change. You can't force it on people. And, I'm not sure if you're familiar with the works of Ruth Bader Ginsburg. She was a justice on the Supreme Court, and she passed away recently. And she actually would have been 88 years old if she had survived until last week. And a lot of people talked about her history on the bench and her views about feminism. And she always did say that the change in the laws have to be gradual. You have to have men and women that buy in to this concept of the change in laws. It can't be done in one fell swoop because that's really where you get problems and an overreaction. And then, so that's with any issue. There has to be that gradual change.
Yes, very sensitive times right now. I think we need to have good leaders to keep us level-headed, to make sure that we don't make decisions that are going to undo a lot of the goodness that society or civilization has kind of fostered at this point. So yeah, I'm definitely in your part of the field. So, but tell me a little bit about you and what you do, because you've got a really interesting like legal background, and I don't understand reading your bio what half of this means. So
Okay. So I'm a family law attorney in New York. I'm a partner in a firm, knock wood. I've been with this firm since I'm a law student. So it's 27 years that I've been with the same firm, first as a law student, then as a clerk, then as an associate, and now as a partner. And I've been a partner for almost 15 years. And so I've been in this field of family law for a very long time, from the time when I started out when I was a young mother until now. I'm still married a very long time, and I have 4 children that are mostly grown. And my role as a mother and my working together with my husband to raise our children together has really informed the way I counsel my clients, the way I view marriage, and it has really brought me into a territory regarding religious and cultural issues in divorce, which is now a very active niche area of my practice and a growing area of my practice. And of course, everyone comes to a relationship with their own baggage, with their own values, and their own ways of communicating and dealing with conflict. And when people become married or cohabit and raise children together, all of their issues and all of their baggage, good or bad, really affects the relationship, and it affects how long the relationship is going to be and how happy it's going to be. So I have a lot of my own personal perspective that I bring into it. I do think that marriage is a valuable institution. I think it's not for everyone. More and more, I'm realizing that not everyone wants to be married. There are plenty of people that want to consider ways to become parents outside of marriage. And now there's a lot of changes in the law. We call it fertility law in New York. It's regarding reproductive rights and frozen embryos and surrogacy. These are all very new and exciting ways for people to consider growing their family, whether they're married or not. So ultimately, I really have a passion for what I do. I recently got a degree in psychology. I happen to think family law is really, a lot of it is psychology and social work and connecting people with resources and help that's not always found in a courtroom. Sometimes it's with a mental health professional. Sometimes it's considering other options to divorce. I really like to have a holistic view of a client, what their problems are and how to best resolve them. And I really believe in co-parenting and trying to avoid conflict so that you can do your best to move past your relationship breakup and try to give your children the best shot at surviving into adulthood without having a legacy of emotional pain and financial pain from a divorce. So I am a mediator as well. I really believe in out-of-court, uncontested processes whenever possible. At the same time, we have a very strong litigation team in my firm, and sometimes you do need to go to a judge. Sometimes you need to ask for help from a court. For me, that's always a strategy that follows an effort to resolve a case out of court if possible.
I'm going to ask you this question before I kind of leave my feedback and additional questions on what you just said. Did you ever watch a show called Damages with Glenn Close?
I'm familiar with it. I can't say I remember the details all that well. I just adore Glenn Close. So
yeah,
she's great.
It is a fantastic law, like kind of legal firm show. And I was going to ask you if it's anything like that in real life, which I'm assuming it's a little bit like that, but it was so dramatic. It was a joke. I was going to joke about it, but yeah, that's an amazing show. And I do understand how like your degree in psychology would really help for you to become some kind of like, I guess, be better at your job, be better at making decisions that are going to put people under so much financial stress or not. Like, how do you manage that? Well, you could call it like a contradiction almost, because it's your business. So so how do you kind of like, do you just go at it from a holistic perspective and say, okay, look, let's just figure out what really is going on?
I mean, I try. I mean, every client comes to the divorce process with their own issues, and some of them are mental health issues. There are clients that are very resilient and bounce back. There are clients that are very anxious, and I can tell that a settlement is even more important for them as opposed to going through a court process that is only going to make their mental health issues worse. There are a lot of issues regarding parents and how well they get along with their own children, especially teenagers that have a right to choose where they want to live. with the mother or the father or both. It's very important for parents to understand that, their children have rights too. And it's not just going to be their way and what they want and a schedule that they think is going to last until their children are 18. That is not the case. So the most important thing, the most overarching theme with all of this is really setting expectations. It's making sure my clients understand the law, understand how their unique facts of their case kind of fit in with the legal framework, and then having to deal with their own psychological issues and then their spouse's issues, because ultimately you can only reach a settlement if everyone is really ready. It's timing, really, prepared to find middle ground and then sign off on a legal contract that's going to affect the rest of their life. There's a lot of aspects to it that are under their control and a lot that is not under their control. And my job is to really explain that to them, explain to them the risks of settling and the risks of not settling. What is the benefit financially, emotionally, how much time it all takes? And in general, I do feel like people are happier when their case is over, even if it means making some financial concessions and compromises, because the good stuff is waiting on the other side. When the case is over, when they're away from a relationship that wasn't serving them, when they can have a fresh start to their life and make decisions that hopefully are in their best interests. And they need to get through that messy part to get to the end. And that's really where they're going to find, hopefully, some control over their own life again.
How many people, what percentage would you say, give or take, and I don't want to put you in on the spot here, but what would you say is the percentage of people that approach you that kind of take your advice and say, all right, actually, I'm going to figure this out outside of court?
A lot of them do. And the ones, most of my clients are referred to me, so they know how I operate. Mostly they're getting referrals from clients or professionals that know my system, which is really, we make an effort to resolve the case out of court and at the same time set expectations. And if it doesn't work, we try something else. Sometimes it is sending a letter like we're about to go to court. Sometimes it's preparing proposals to send to the other side. We have to do financial investigations. A lot of times clients are willing to follow my strategy and see how that works. And I'm managing their expectations, staying in touch with them. My staff is amazing. We are very supportive to our clients. It is almost like a therapeutic relationship. I'm not going to say I'm the right lawyer for everyone. I'm absolutely not. There are clients that want to go to court, or they're unreasonable, or they're going to use me or the court process in ways that I don't agree with. Well, I mean, I'm not going to try to make myself something that I'm not. I'm there to offer options and hopefully let my clients see that progress is being made. We are resolving issues and isolating the issues that are not being resolved and focusing on those in the hopes of having a global resolution. They have to really see what I'm seeing as a little bit more objectively. I can say, listen, we've made progress on these issues. We've figured out what we need to do on other issues, and constantly engage with the client to get them to see that things are becoming resolved. If things are not being resolved, we need to change our strategy. And sometimes that means going to a judge, and that's okay. Clients cannot control everything. Sometimes they're dealing with a spouse who's a narcissist or who's unreasonable or has a mental illness or won't share documents or won't allow parenting time no matter what we try, or they're withholding the children. We have to try something else. And I'm not going to hesitate to go to court if necessary. Sometimes that's what you need to do, and you need to have a team that can jump on things and make it happen.
So you've seen a lot of different types of kind of relationship rifts and breakups, and
Sure.
and you have probably got a really good feel for what requires what kind of approach. So can you kind of give me an idea of what the more serious end of the spectrum looks like in your experience? And then I would imagine that's not the majority, right? The majority would be like...
It's not the majority.
Right.
No, I was just going to say the more serious end of the spectrum is probably 10 to 20% of the cases where you have real issues that are emergencies or toxic or dangerous. So I would include domestic violence. In those cases, you can't sit down and talk to someone who's abusive, who has a real problem communicating. And I know I have compassion. I mean, maybe they're dealing with their own issues, but ultimately my job is to protect my clients. So if I'm dealing with a case of domestic violence or child abuse and neglect, real financial abuse, where one party is not cooperating, not paying bills, letting assets be wasted or go into foreclosure, or not supporting children. These are instances where you have to take a closer look at the dynamics of the case and whether it's time to file an application with a court. Of course, that's costly, so I have to explain that to the client, what the costs are, but what the potential benefits are. There are some cases where we're dealing with, nice people. They're dealing with their own issues. There's no danger or emergency issues, but that case stays out of court, and maybe it takes a little bit longer. Maybe it's going to take an extra few months to resolve it. I would much rather go at a slower pace. Again, telling the client there's progress being made. It's the cases that progress is not being made, and my clients are not having parenting time or not really being able to have a meaningful relationship with their children, or there's some other power dynamic where they're not able to work with their issues with their spouse or with spouse's counsel. Then again, in those cases, we have to consider other strategies. And usually that involves litigation.
I see. Okay, interesting. So you would say the majority of the cases are like, would you say irreconcilable differences as people hear in the movies and things?
So you're talking about the grounds for divorce? Yes, the reason why people separate, we call it now no fault divorce. Nobody's a bad person. The marriage didn't work out. They're very neutral grounds, not offensive to anyone. And in New York and across the US, that's the majority of cases are using those grounds for divorce. 10 years ago in New York, we had other grounds that were commonly used, including adultery and cruelty and abandonment and things that may be true, but really start the case from a very adversarial, negative place. And we're wasting a lot of time and resources trying to figure out who the wrongdoer was in the marriage. And at this point, in New York and in most of the Western world, people are using more neutral grounds for divorce. And it does change the tenor of the negotiations from the very beginning. It doesn't mean that if one spouse cheated or is abusive, it doesn't mean that those issues don't enter the financial and custody aspects of a case. It just means that the courts are not really concerned anymore about why the marriage failed. It's sort of like, that's not the focus. Let's move forward and talk about children and assets. So irreconcilable differences are part of what's now grounds for divorce.
Right. And you mentioned children as something really to take a special note of. Like, what happens with kids in these situations usually? Like, again, maybe a spectrum. Like, I mean, because I want people to understand what they're getting into, because really what the episode is about is like, let's look at the process, because a lot of you listening are going to be thinking, I want to leave my partner because of this, that, and the other. I want people to understand what actually happens before they go through the expensive process of maybe their lawyer or their firm doesn't tell them these things because they're not as ethically oriented as you might be.
Well, I think it's first of all, it's caveat emptor. Every person needs to find out the information and hire the professional that is going to show them all of the options and really tell them the truth. In New York and across the US, joint custody is very much a starting point for negotiations. And joint custody means that both parents are going to have a role in raising the children, even up to 50-50 time, which is very popular now. I'm not going to say it's the norm, but there's more and more a recognition that if you have two working parents, which is what most households have, you're going to have children that are going to spend time in the households of both parents once they separate.
What is the norm for this?
So the norm is still a primary household. So you have one parent who has more primary residential custody, it's called, but the other parent might have a lot more time on weekends, or maybe a midweek overnight, maybe more time during school recess periods or holidays or the summer. It's much more of a shared parenting concept, which reflects the fact that fathers have come a very long way. When I first started over 20 years ago, fathers really had a much minimal role, and mothers were like sort of in charge of the kids. And I think back to my own parenting and how I started out as a mom, I probably shared that view. Today, it's very different. Fathers want more time with their children. A lot of them are working from home. A lot of them travel with their children and are involved in, sports and activities and homework. It's very different than it was. And I really think the working moms, really can see the benefit of it. And I tell my clients who are women my practice is really 50-50 men and women. But I tell the women, you know, if you're working, it's great to have a co-parent who is going to be there in case you're not available, who needs to run to the school if the child is sick, who can take care of the children if you have to travel. You know, if you have to work late, it really is great to have a backup, and that backup is your co-parent. And you really need to be open to those possibilities. Yes, it means the children are not going to be with you 80% of the time the way it was before. Maybe it's going to be a different type of split of time, but there's a lot to like about it. You know, it really does give you a break. And most parents, if they're being honest, wouldn't mind a break sometimes from parenting. And it really gives you more enthusiasm and energy to be with your children when they're with you. So you can plan activities when they're with you. And you can also say, okay, it's time to go to your dad. He's going to be with you now for a few days. And that gives you a little bit of a break. It does mean, though, that child support numbers are going to be different. So, you know, it does change the financial equation a little bit. But, you know, I think women are moving off this idea that they are responsible for the children, that their main identity is as mothers, and the father has to support the family. That has definitely shifted. And I think that's a very good thing.
Yes, especially because the majority, well, not the majority, there is a growing percentage of men now who are becoming more of that role. And therefore, it's the woman who is the breadwinner and the person who works, and the man is the one. So there is, I think you're so right. It's so different from when, like, because I'm 37 and I grew up with, you know, those more traditional conservative kind of views on things. I've talked to many women around the world, you know, covering their stories in my series, Diary of a Woman. And what I've learned is there's a recurring theme of Wonder Women. I actually wanted to call it Wonder Women at the beginning, but then I think it was, you know, I mean, there are stories where, you know, maybe it's, you know, it's like it's something that's more of a kind of a mutual decision rather than just the woman actually going out and getting more control of her life. So what I realized was there is a huge percentage of these single mothers that are just like energized to the max, and they are high achievers, and they are driven, and they are ambitious, but almost to their detriment, because they have built this defense mechanism and this kind of like identity that they are the only ones that they can rely on, which makes, because they've been abused, they've been cheated on, they've been left with a baby or whatever. It varies. And I think it's really great to see a woman take control of her life that way. But I think it's also really sad because, like, maybe in a situation that you mentioned where you're trying to mediate to have a 50-50 co-parenting, I can imagine the woman's like, no, I'll take care of it. I'll take care. He can't do anything. Don't rely on him. Like, no chance, right? So I think you're nice that you're it's nice that you're actually doing that. I think that's an important thing to be aware of, is like, get the help you need, not just on the legal front, but also on the mental, emotional front as well.
Yeah. It's such a good point, because I think women, that whole one, first of all, I'm obsessed with Wonder Woman. I'm glad you brought that up, because I just love Wonder Woman and Gal Gadot and everything about the whole energy of just being this powerful woman. But you're absolutely right. You know, women cannot do it all. Part of self-care as a working woman means getting time off and getting a break. And that means someone has to pick up the slack. And it's probably going to be your child's father. Even if the father is not, you know, I hate to say that women and men have different standards with parenting. Let's just call it different. You know, it's not going to be exactly the same in both households. Maybe the diet won't be the same. Maybe the bedtime won't be the same. It'll be different. And the child will learn that in two different households, there's a mom and dad that love me, and it's a little bit different in both households, and that's okay. And parents have to make it okay for each other. Ideally, they will communicate well. They will have the same bedtimes and the same routines and the same rules regarding TVs and video games and all these things that parents need to really agree on. But if it's different, that's okay too. And moms, we do have to let go of that control, because I saw it in my own parenting. where I thought I did everything the best. I used to do all the doctor's appointments for 4 children. I thought it was on my calendar, and my husband worked in Manhattan and was never, ever able to participate. And it felt good for me to say, I've got it covered. This is my domain, and I'm going to work full time, and I'm going to have dinner ready on the table. And I did do all those things. And women are capable of doing all those things. But why? What's the benefit? Share some of the doctor appointments. Let the father go and do some of those things, and he'll do great. Let him have that rapport with the child. Let him run to the drugstore and interact with the teachers and answer the emails. There's no need for a woman to do it all, and it's just too hard to do it all. And I recognize that in myself. Luckily, I had an amazing co-parent, my husband, who's still amazing. And it really was a relief to say, Maurice, you know what? I need you to do 17 orthodontic appointments. I'm not doing that anymore, and I can't do it anymore. And luckily, he's great at doing that stuff, and he runs and does a lot of the things that I used to do by myself. And it is something I tell my clients, men and women, that if you share some of the responsibilities, it makes life so much better. And it's great for children to see that both parents are doing all those things. And in any event, that's what the law is. The law is gender neutral when it comes to custody and child support. And we do have women breadwinners, which is great. That means they're working at their careers. We have to learn to share a little bit of the parenting too. And anyone listening right now, it's a great relief. And your child will benefit if you will open up your mind to those possibilities upon separation and divorce.
Yeah. Yeah, it's so tragic, the impact it has on, and I think that's one of the reasons why we have such like, let's say there's a weakness in society. And I think a lot of it is fueled by, maybe these relaxed value systems that we had after the Second World War, where we were no longer at threat of having, civilization destroyed or some kind of oppression. We were very much free to go about our business and do as we pleased. And I think over time, we've just become, quite much more relaxed. But also, we've lost a lot of our values and principles. And I'm about to ask you a question, which is not legal oriented, but it's more your own beliefs about marriage. You mentioned before how important you think marriage is, even though, and you could probably correct me here, the divorce rate is like over 50%, perhaps, or around about 50%?
No, it's not. No. So marriage, I think it is important. Like I said, it's not for everyone. I think there are many people that are religious or traditional or come from certain cultural backgrounds where marriage is something that's essential before you become a parent. And I totally understand that and respect that. And I even believe in that myself, actually, coming from a Middle Eastern background. However, I recognize that marriage is not for everyone. And some people probably should avoid marriage, and other people should probably avoid parenting. Let's be honest. It's not for everyone. And no one should feel compelled to meet parental expectations or community expectations if it's not the right fit for them. I mean, which is why I believe people should marry a little bit later into their 20s, which gets me to the point that the marriage rate is dropping, but the divorce rate is also dropping because people are marrying later. And so there's a lot of statistics that support this, that throughout the United States, and I think even in Europe as well, the marriage age is rising and people are marrying in their later 20s with more education and more assets. And the divorce rate is dropping at the same time among that group, which means that when left to their own devices, if we ease off on the pressures that we put on young people to kind of hook up and get married young and have children because the biological clock is ticking and women better hurry up and have children before it's too late, which causes them to enter marriages that really aren't the right ones. And then inevitably they get divorced because they've married too young without really knowing who they are and what's important. That's not the right advice. The right advice is let young people figure it out in their 20s. We now can freeze eggs. They can create their families in very different ways than their parents and grandparents, and left to their own devices, marrying a little bit later, they are choosing better. They're choosing better partners, whether it's a same-sex relationship or a more traditional relationship. It's better for young people to figure it out when they know what they really want. And I really do think we're going to see that trend continue, a little bit later marriages. Maybe the parents are not going to be so happy about that, but I really think we're going to see more people that parent as single parents that don't want a partner at all. or maybe delayed parenting into their late 30s and 40s. It might make us uncomfortable, but if that's what the medicine and technology supports, and by the way, a lot of these young people are doing prenuptial agreements, which is like divorce insurance. They're protecting their assets. They're signing agreements before they walk down the aisle. And these are also trends that we're going to see take off and continue.
So
the divorce rate is dropping.
Are on the rise
Yes,
compared to
they are.
historically. Right.
Yes, they are, because young people, millennials, is that what you call them too in Europe?
I think I'm a millennial, but just
you're a millennial for sure. You're a millennial because you're in your 30s.
You've got that look about you.
Young people, So young people in their 20s and 30s are fearful of divorce because their parents and grandparents got divorced at high rates, that 50% you were talking about. So the way to deal with those fears, because millennials really are into equality, a lot of them are dating people that are also working. So men and women are used to seeing men and women their age as earners. And they are doing prenuptial agreements because they're willing to be transparent about their finances. And they're willing to sign off on an agreement that if our marriage doesn't work out, I don't want to support you. I'll support our children, but I don't want to support you. This is very popular in the New York area. I'm getting tons of calls for prenuptial agreements. And they were steadily rising over the past 5 years because of the changes in the law. And I think it's a good thing because it means that before you get married, you're really going to have a good conversation about what your goals and expectations are, what your income is, what your assets are. Do you have debts? It's good to know these things. And I really think it gives people more confidence to get married, which is a good thing too.
Sure. That's I would definitely agree with that. So I guess what I wanted to ask you was, so we've got some really good advice for people who are maybe going to get into a relationship. We've just kind of outlined some of the things that maybe they want to consider before they make that big commitment. What about people who are already in the relationship and they're having these thoughts about, I don't know if I can continue in this marriage. I think I want to, like, especially with COVID, right? Because this is what we discussed prior to our episode here is, all right, well, we've got a almost like an epidemic of people who are breaking up in the time of COVID. Yeah. And a lot of it is unnecessary, obviously, because of the situation and the mechanics of it. You're spending too much time together. Do you have any advice based on what you've seen so far about how people can navigate that?
I do. I have some advice, and a lot of it comes from my own perspective, being married as long as I am. I don't think divorce is a decision to be made casually. I really think you should think it over. Marriage counselors can perform wonders. So can going on a vacation. Date nights can save a marriage. It really comes down to communication. The more communication there is about money, about in-laws, about sex, about work pressures, about children, the better the marriage is going to be, and the more friendly the divorce will be, God forbid if there's a divorce, right? It does come down to having communication and not avoiding secrets. Don't keep secrets in marriage, whether it's about money or anything else. I have seen marriages survive infidelity and become stronger and better marriages. It takes both sides willing to be open and honest and forgiving. The one thing that cannot be okay is domestic violence. If you're in a relationship that's abusive with someone who's using substances or who's mentally ill or who's hurting you, you have to ask for help. Is it possible changes can be made? I have seen it happen. I'm not going to say it's easy. There have to be some things that are unacceptable. And for me, that line is domestic violence. If someone is hurting you physically, if they're putting you down every day, if you're being, verbally abused, psychologically abused, you have to get help. And if that help leads to marriage counseling that improves the relationship, that's fine. But if the help means you're going to go to a therapist who's going to tell you that what you've normalized is not okay and is harming you, you're potentially going to make a decision to leave the relationship. But you do need to tell someone. You need to open up to a therapist or a good friend or a sister or, someone who's going to hear you and tell you this life you're living is not okay and you need to get help. And hopefully you'll act on that advice, because no one deserves to live in a relationship that's abusive. Eventually, it will harm you psychologically. I have seen people, men and women, same-sex relationships and traditional relationships that are damaged by just verbal abuse. It breaks their spirit. It breaks their joy. It makes them really not whole people. And obviously, it affects children. If you're in a relationship with children and there's abuse going on, things being thrown, drinking, abuse, that's damaging the children. So you have to ask for help. Anything short of that, I do think has the potential to being resolved. So if people are fighting, if there's stress, financial stress, stress with children, talk about it. Go to a counselor. That's what they're there for. It's never been easier than right now to get mental health support because a lot of it is virtual. A lot of it is very affordable right now. There are support groups, even Clubhouse, where I know you and I met, Clément. There's support groups regarding marriage and relationships, and you will find support. And it really does start with that. Ask for help and get some marriage advice. And if it's a priority to you to stay married or to stay in a relationship, get an advisor who will help you do that. And maybe you'll make some headway with that. I think a lot of marriages actually have improved during COVID. I think a lot of couples that weren't spending a lot of time together have reconnected. But you're right, more couples have fallen apart because it hasn't exactly been a second honeymoon, being with your spouse 24/7 and children and homeschooling and all the stresses we've all gone through. And if the marriage is not doing well, at least make a decision to try to keep your case out of court if you can. Everything I've said about co-parenting holds true. Your children deserve to be raised by both parents. If you're in that 10 to 20% of cases that are really a little bit more challenging because of the issues we talked about, then try to come up with a strategy that works for that too. And be compassionate, be forgiving. None of us is perfect. I tell my clients all the time, if there was a video camera trained on me during my terrible moments with my spouse or children, I wouldn't be proud of myself, but I will forgive myself. And I always strive to do better. And any of us can really take that advice to heart. Try to do better in your relationships and stay away from people that harm you. And if you're the person that's being harmful, take a good look in the mirror and do something about that too. Maybe you're the problem. Maybe you need to get to a therapist. Maybe you're controlling or have to work on yourself. And it's okay to admit that. And it might even save your relationship if that's what's important to you. So it's not always the other person. Sometimes it's you. Do something about it.
Yeah, that's really good advice. Mirrors a lot of the stuff that we've been creating in terms of content, which is like, are you the problem perhaps? Do you need to maybe look in the mirror a little bit better and see if there's anything that needs work on there? I'm getting a lot of inquiries about, do you counsel? Do you offer therapy? To the point where now we're actually training our staff to have these like mental health, first aid kind of courses and things, because I just so many people out there that need help. So, chances are if you're listening to this, you can ask for help. We might be able to direct you in the best direction, but, you would be a great person to lead them on to. So if anyone needs any advice for marriage issues, how would they get in touch with you and kind of talk to you about that?
I have a free consultation for anyone and everyone, and I have a large staff that helps me keep up with inquiries. I'm easy to reach. The easiest way is by email, Jackie@lawjaw.com, JACKIE @LAWJAW.com. I'm easy to find on LinkedIn. I'm easy to find on Facebook. I'm on Clubhouse occasionally. But I can only give legal advice pertaining to New York State. I have a lot of advice to share in general about relationships. I do a lot of speaking regarding religious divorce, cultural divorce issues, and other things. There's help available almost anywhere. Anyone who can hear us and see us, there's a way to reach out and get help. And your life will improve once someone can give you a little bit of objective advice. If you're trapped in a terrible relationship and a terrible marriage, you shouldn't suffer in silence. You should ask for help and maybe open up to your partner if you need help and get yourself to a better place. And your children will benefit. And most parents I deal with, they really do love their children. They're not looking to harm their children. They feel terrible. but sometimes you're part of the problem. So if you really do love your children and you really want to avoid their therapy bills when they're teenagers and in their 20s, then you need to do something to stop the problem now. And that's within our control. At the very least, if you're trapped in a house in lockdown during COVID, don't fight in front of your children. Take your adult arguments out of earshot, because that hurts. Children, they put their headphones in and escape, and you don't want to do that to your kids. They need to feel safe in their home.
Yeah.
So do the right thing.
It's very traumatic. Well, look, thank you so much for sharing all of that really valuable, practical advice for everyone listening. I truly appreciate it. You've been an excellent, excellent guest.
Oh my gosh, thank God. Thank you. I really appreciated our conversation. And, there's so many things that are different about all of us, the different countries we live in. I'm sure lots of people from all over the world will hear this podcast, but the things that make us the same are really important. That in any relationship, there has to be respect and communication, and that we all want the best for the next generation, for children. And so these are things that unite all of us, hopefully.